Step into a world of enigma with Paranormal M, where the stories we unravel will keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe and turn on notifications to journey through the latest mind-boggling tales. Does anyone have any idea what might have happened to me? So I was laying in bed last night, trying to fall asleep at around 5 a.m., and suddenly I got the weirdest feeling. I can't even describe it, but it was like a dead center in the chest kind of a feeling. After a moment, I have a realization that this feeling is my grandpa. I have no idea what made me realize that, or how a feeling can represent a specific person, but I somehow just knew. For this next part, it's worth noting that I was laying facing away from where I climb into bed from. So, after a minute with this feeling, the birds that are chirping outside and every other noise goes dead silent. It was like somebody just shut the sound off. As soon as this happens, I get the distinct feeling that someone is standing behind me. That there's a presence there, standing in the space between the bed and the wall on the side of the bed that I get in on. Which, as I noted, I had my back towards at that time. It's also worth noting that none of this felt scary at all. It just felt strange. I can't even describe how it made me feel. At this point, I was absolutely convinced that my grandpa had passed away over the night, and was simply visiting me before moving on. After a few minutes, probably, the birds start chirping again, and the building starts making noise again, the AC turns on, etc. I turn over, and the feeling that's there, that presence, goes away. So, I grab my phone and shoot my parents a text, describing what just happened, and asking them to check on my grandpa. Now, this is what confuses me the most. He was totally fine, so I don't know if I'm just crazy or what, but I was convinced that it was him. Strange ghostly experience. It was a Wednesday night. My dad was having his weekly game night with his friends. Throw darts, drinking beer, typical game night for my dad. And my mom and I went out to the garage where his man cave was to tell him goodnight. I remember telling my dad's cousin about the tooth I had lost and that I was so excited for the tooth fairy to come. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I usually slept with my mom on these nights, since my dad didn't want to disturb us coming to bed after midnight. She tucked me into bed and read me a story. Afterward, I closed my eyes while my mom read her own book. The click of her lamp would always wake me up for some reason, and I stared into the pitch-black room. Only this time, I was met with a strange figure standing in the corner of the room, in between my mom's dresser and the door. It looked like a woman. Her head was looking over her right shoulder with her body facing forward. She did not have any features, other than the outline of her body. She was solid green and glowing without any light shining on her. I was frozen with fear. The longer I stared at it, it would sort of float toward me. When I shut my eyes out of fear, it would be right in the same place it was before. When daylight came, it disappeared. Or so I thought. It was about a week later and I had avoided that room like the plague, because I had an uneasy feeling every time I stepped into the room. I was eating lunch and watching cartoons on the TV in my parents' bedroom. when I saw it again out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't green this time, but it was clear and in the daylight. It was shaped the exact same way and in the exact same spot. I was in a different spot in the room, and it floated toward me. The same thing happened when I stopped looking at it. It was in the same corner as before. A couple of months went by, and my great-grandmother had passed away. My dad inherited some of her furniture, including her dresser, and my parents decided to move it into the bedroom. After the dressers were switched, the figure never came back. My brother has the old dresser in his room and hasn't had any experiences like I did. I'm almost 23 now, and I moved out of my parents' house. Their old bedroom has been transformed into a new guest room, and I stay in there occasionally when I come home to visit. The uneasy feeling that I used to have is totally gone, and I haven't seen anything since the figure disappeared years ago. I've told my mom about it, but of course she doesn't believe me and hasn't seen anything herself. I grew up in Russellville, Kentucky, which has a lot of history with the Civil War. My parents' house used to be a vet's office back in the 1800s, but I'm not sure what that has to do with the ghost. I still have zero explanation for what happened all those years ago. It never tried to hurt me. It would just move toward me multiple times at night. CHI, strange creature encounter when I was a kid. We moved into this modular home. I think a trailer, but on an actual brick foundation, in a rural area in Virginia in the summer of 2004. It was me, my mom, my dad, my older sister, her husband, and their child, which is my niece. I stayed home a lot after school and on weekends, due to everybody having to work and my niece going to the babysitter's house. It was never that big of a deal because my grandma lived right across the driveway. We lived down a long gravel driveway that was cut off from the main road. I can't remember exactly when this occurred, but it was after my dad died in April of 2005. I was home alone after school one day, watching the Weekenders on Toon Disney with my little Pekingese poodle mix, his name was Clyde, in my lap while eating some pizza rolls. All of a sudden, our huge, and when I say huge, this dog had no business being as big as he was, considering what breed that he was mixed with, a golden lab boxer mix, Broody, that we kept chained in the backyard, started to bark. Not as usual, hey, I'm out of water, or squirrel bark, but it was a violent, scary bark. I looked out the sliding glass door that goes to the backyard, and I see him at the end of his chain, trying to break loose and get at something in the woods. I can't really see what he's trying to get at, until all of a sudden some creature walks out of the woods and stops right at the tree line. It was about 4 feet tall, walked on all fours. Its body was similar to a bear. It had brown fur. But its face, that was its most distinct feature. It was solid white and completely flat. It had 2 black slits where its eyes would be. No kind of nose to be seen, and its mouth just hung open. A black void, no tongue or teeth that I could see from where I was. It looked in my direction, and I remember just being overcome with fear and dread when it looked over at me. I started to shake, I was so scared. Before I could even get off the couch to get to the landline to call my mom, it just slowly backed itself back into the woods. Rudy was barking and growling the entire time that it was standing there, which was about 2 minutes in total, and for at least 10 minutes after it had left my sight, and that was before he finally calmed down. I called my mom, my sister, my BIL, my aunt, and my uncle that lived behind my grandma, and then my grandma before somebody answered. She told me to walk over to it, but I was too scared to go outside, so she came and got me. As a kid, I called it the white-faced anteater, and my family just dismissed me as seeing things, even though my dog had seen it too and was trying to get to it. My uncle told me it was probably a big-ass possum, but I knew damn well what a possum looked like, and that definitely wasn't it. To this day, I'm 23 now. I still have nightmares where all I see is this thing standing in my yard at the tree line staring at me. I always wake up screaming and sweating, and my girlfriend has to come console me. Has anyone else ever seen or heard of anything similar to what it is that I'm trying to describe? A mashup of short paranormal experiences. So me and my friend were talking on the microphone, and we shared some of our paranormal experiences with each other. I thought it would be nice if I shared some of these stories in this subreddit. So, without further explanation, let me share these stories with you. So for this first story, I was in my bedroom doing my own thing, and I decided to look out of my window to see if any of my friends were at the nearby park. Turns out that they weren't, but when I was looking outside, in the corner of my eye, I saw a shadowy figure. Well, that's all that happened. All these stories are pretty short anyway. Now let's move on to the next one. So this story is about my mom, and she has mental issues, so I won't go into that. And it could have been the actual cause of this, but we don't really know. So anyway, she was casually laying on her sofa watching Netflix, as she does, and she took a glance toward the living room. She told me that she could see a young boy in the window of the door, and this young boy kept appearing in the window of the living room door. So whenever I used to come downstairs, she would get freaked out because she thought the young boy was in fact there. So this is the final story of this thread, and this one's a little bit of a longer one. So my friend was sleeping, as we all do, and then he got sleep paralysis. This is the first and only time thus far that he's gotten sleep paralysis. And I can't remember what he said it looked like, but it was the usual shadowy figure. And I believe it was wearing a black cloak, and his cat sat there meowing at him. And then he woke up. And then our other friend recalled seeing the same figure in places that I can't quite remember. But he thinks he's actually being possessed by something. And whenever somebody talks about his demon, he starts tearing up. The Wall. So around a month ago, maybe 2, I made a post on this subreddit about some ghostly encounters with me, my family, and a friend that we all had. So I'm making another one, but this time regarding my mom. So to give context, my mom has been encountering a young boy in the corner of her eye, usually seen in the window of one of our doors in the house. So I got home and went through the hallway upstairs to go to the toilet, and in the corner of my eye I could see some drawings in chalk on the wall. Also, my sister was at her dad's house. So I saw a ghostly face with dead black eyes, a sun with a smile, a book with a torn-out page, and finally, a man who was beheaded. If you think you know what these mean, please contact me. I got my mom's attention and she took a look upstairs and she was mortified. She immediately went back downstairs, but I sat down and I started pondering what it could mean. I can't really figure out what it means, but I think during the boy's life he was blinded by the sun and got beheaded, but I don't know what the book could mean. I went in my room and I started my research, and I came to the conclusion that it's a poltergeist. And my conclusion came because apparently they can pick up and drop things. So it could have picked up the chalk in my old bedroom and wrote on the walls with it. So I went downstairs and I told my mom. But she said, "No, it's just a little boy trying to get my attention." I thought she was talking about me, but she then said, "The boy who watches me through the door." Once again, if you think you know anything about this, please contact me so I can try to figure out what's going on. Also, I will keep you all updated with this if anything happens. The ghost in my house who protected me from an uninvited spirit. Ouija board used. My childhood home had an odd history. There was a very old camera system on the house from the 80s. We were told that a man had lived there once who was running from the FBI or something. The conclusion was unknown, but the house went to his family who later sold it. As soon as we moved in, we noticed the basement was super strange. It was completely unfinished with skeleton keys jammed into the borders between the wall and the floor. We'd hear strange sounds occasionally at first. I started having dreams of gatherings of men in the basement, having business meetings or something, drinking, smoking cigars. I would often experience this sensation in my sleep, like someone was ripping my door open and rushing in, but I'd wake up immediately to nothing. We moved in when I was 5. Flash forward to about 17 years old. My grandmother passed away. I was very close with her and hurt by this, because I didn't really get to say goodbye, and I had a lot to tell her. I ignorantly decided to make a Ouija board, which turned out to be a really stupid idea. Of course, it still affects me to 25, so don't do it. Anyway, I had lit some candles and I tried to communicate with my grandmother, but had no luck. A few nights later, I'm sleeping soundly in my bed, facing the wall. I suddenly get woken up by being shaken. I wake up immediately scared because I hear somebody in my room, walking back and forth. I refused to turn around because of how freaked out I was, but I could see this person in my mind almost. I could hear the walking back and forth and the mumble and the worry in this woman's voice. And I could see her in my mind walking back and forth, and she just absolutely looked crazed and distraught. She shook me again. I could tell that she wanted something from me, but I couldn't understand her, and this was beyond me. All of a sudden, all the ways from downstairs, I hear an absolutely roaring statement to the effect of, "Go away!" that echoed through the entire house. As I'm laying there still frozen and facing the wall, I noticed that the woman in my room was gone. I said, "Thank you, sir," and went back to bed. I felt protected by the spirit of this man on a few occasions, and he even showed me an experience that made me face the reality of suicide once. Totally freaked me out, but he taught me a lesson during a period where I was depressed. But that's a whole separate experience. That's for a later time. I tried cleansing the house to release him, but unless he didn't want to leave, I hope his soul's at peace. A German ghost spoke to me at a former Hitler youth camp in New Jersey. So I'm about 21 in this story. I live in Pennsylvania, and I have this great friend whom I met at a concert. She lives in New Jersey. This girl and I haven't seen each other in a little while, so we had planned to go to an event near her, and I was invited to sleep over afterwards. So we did just that, after the night had come. And that night came to an end. She had showed me to her brother's room, whose bed I would be sleeping in, and we go to bed. In the middle of the night, I get awoken by a woman speaking to me in German right next to the bedside. She's rambling and frustrated. I'm good at recognizing languages, and I'm fluent in Russian, so I knew that it was German straight away. Not only that, but I had heard my name a few times in the beginning of her speaking. I was super confused and obviously rather creeped out. I just said something to the effect of, "I don't know who you are, and you're bothering me. I'm trying to sleep. Go away." It stopped. I woke up the next morning and immediately asked my friend about it, as soon as she was awake too. She looked at me a bit shocked and said that her mom claims to hear German in the house, and that her house had apparently been part of a nearby Hitler youth camp. She didn't know much about it, but doing research on the area myself, I found it to be true. Sleep paralysis. Something going on. Hey guys, I have dealt with sleep paralysis almost on a nightly basis since I was about 14. I'm now 30. It's always incredibly vivid and always feels like a visitation from some sort of presence. I've been convinced for decades now that there is something more to my sleeping condition. Something paranormal or spiritual, perhaps. I've spoken to countless doctors and psychiatrists about it over the years, and they all tell me that it's simply sleep paralysis. None of them have helped. A family friend who's a spiritualist told me years ago when I was a teenager to pray whenever it happened. I do most nights, but sometimes it's like maybe it just aggravates whatever presence is in the room with me. I've been attacked. I've been thrown around. And I've even been convinced sometimes that I'm rolling around on the floor wrestling this thing. I hear it too when it happens. It shrieks and makes a horrible radio static-like sound. However, what scares me most is whenever I wake up from the sleep paralysis and look around the pitch black of my bedroom, and I'll see things. Shapes and patterns of bright luminescent colors, often like spiders or glowing, somehow glowing black figures. I'll stare at them and turn the lamp on in the room, on and off. They fade away when the lamp is on and come back when it's off. They often look like spiders or bugs. But if it's been a really bad sleep paralysis event, they'll be humanoid-shaped shadowy figures. I know they're there and I can see them. And no, I'm not a schizophrenic or someone with a mental illness. Last night, however, it happened again. I woke from a vivid dream and I felt something beside me in the bed. I'm so used to this that I know what's going on and basically lucid dream my way into a defensive position and say my prayers. I felt like I was being choked and mounted on my chest. Nothing irregular for these events. I managed to wake myself up and see it. A shadowy figure crawling up on my bedroom curtains. It's about the size of a child, but isn't shaped at all like one. It's built quite stocky and stout. Completely black, yet bright enough to be seen in a dark room. I doze off to sleep completely unfazed, as this is almost a nightly, weekly minimum experience for me. I wake up after what feels like a second and check my phone. An hour has passed. I can't explain how, but I remember hearing someone speak to me. They told me their name was Nokra, Noqra, or something like that. I've felt uneasy ever since. Probably sounds like rambling or someone who's insane, but I almost feel like tonight was some sort of breakthrough for my sleep paralysis, and that I've potentially met the thing, or one of the things, that's been bothering me for literal years and years. The Hat House Ghost. A little background first. I worked for an agency who employs people to work with adults who have cognitive disabilities. We were to assist them with activities of daily living, things like bathing, taking meds, cooking, cleaning, driving them places. The house I was hired for was called the Hat House. Most of the houses were called by either a name of the street that they were on or an acronym that their house had. So that's why this house had the acronym HAT. At the time, we supported an individual. I'll just refer to him as Adam for the sake of confidentiality. Adam was nonverbal and could barely hold his balance while he stood. He would often fall down if he was standing on his own for too long. Adam's preferred mode of transportation was sliding across the floor on his butt. I'm not sure when this started happening, but things quickly began to get weird, and I think it was Adam's mother passing. It started with Adam going to his bedroom and shutting his door, something he would rarely do. Adam would sit on his floor and rock back and forth, grunting to himself until eventually he would start screaming for joy. But then the jumping started. It was literally the sound of someone jumping on the floor, and it would make Adam laugh. Adam loved vibrations like that, so they would often make him smile or laugh. The jumping continued for a while. It was like clockwork, too. Every day around 2 p.m., he would go to his room, and this would happen. Things quickly started to get weird, though. There was talk in the house that other staff would occasionally hear footsteps coming up from the basement stairs when nobody was down there. I witnessed this as well. I'd picked up the overnight shift. Adam woke up at around 4 a.m., so when he came out of his room, and say he was on the kitchen floor, I was sitting with him when suddenly there was the sound of someone rushing up the basement stairs and jiggling the door handle. My heart was literally trying to jump out of my chest at this point. All I want to do is go home. When suddenly from Adam's room I hear a deep voice go, mm-hmm, followed by the jumping sound that he would normally be having in his room at around 2 p.m. Another time I was doing the dishes, and a supported person who lived at the house at the time, who was verbal, was sitting at the kitchen table. He had been talking to me, but there was a lull of silence in the room. I set down the sponge to get the heavy-duty pan scrubber when I heard the person I support start laughing. I turned to look at him, but that's when I noticed the chill in the air. When I turned back around, the sponge was on the windowsill. I asked the supportive person what happened, and he just kind of shrugged while laughing and says, "It just floated." I got suckered into working an overnight again, so I'm sitting in the office, and it's around 2 a.m. All of a sudden, the living room light turns on. And since I had the office door open, I heard the unmistakable sound of the cord from the light being pulled. I kind of continued in the office thinking someone was awake and I just hadn't heard them, which didn't strike me as odd until I heard the beanbag chair in the living room being picked up. I went to see who it was when I hear the beanbag chair drop to the floor. Nobody was in the living room, and the only way to get in there was through the kitchen or the front door to the house, which was locked and deadbolted. Another time I had an encounter with the spirit of Hat House, and that was when I was in the staff office talking to a coworker. It was around 10 p.m. The staff office had 2 desks, one with a computer and the other right next to the door to go outside. The coworker was at the computer desk, and I was at the other desk. As we were shooting the shit with each other, I went to go look at the desk when I noticed something standing in the window to the door of the staff office. All I can describe it is maybe just a shape of a human, but it was made out of smoke. After I saw the figure, I quickly turned around and looked at my coworker, who was looking at me wide-eyed. I'm sure I had some sort of look on my face as the coworker said, "You saw it too." I worked at the Hat House for 6 years. Adam was there for 2 of those years. After Adam moved out, the paranormal stuff stopped, as if it never had existed to begin with. Ghosts at Fort Benning. My brother, who I'll call John, he's an 18-year-old male, for the sake of this post, called me, a 20-year-old male, yesterday in a panic while I was working. He called me to tell me that he saw a ghost on base. He doesn't usually call, especially not when he knows that I'm busy, so I know that this was serious. He said that he was driving near Harmony Hill when he saw a man walk out toward the road wearing BDU, which when I looked it up, it said that it stands for Battle Dress Uniform, which was used from the 80s to the early 2000s with blood all over his face. And he says the man asked him for directions to the main post. John pointed him in the right direction, but when he looked in his mirrors, the man was gone. John also shared with me that he had spoiled his pants after realizing what he had seen. The only other times I've heard him sound that upset were after he crashed an ATV with both of us in it, and when he was under investigation for a serious crime that he had no involvement in. He's usually very level-headed and reserved. When John was younger, around 3 or 4, he used to talk a lot about paranormal encounters and other metaphysical things. But as far as I can get out of him, he has no recollection or desire to recall those scenarios. We went to see a few mediums and psychics who talked to him about his experiences, but I don't know whatever came of those conversations. He never brought them up. I used to mention auras of strangers and family members, but the only specifics I can remember were him saying that he couldn't see mine because something was blocking it. He also mentioned another spirit that he thinks he saw while he was on fire watch one night. He says he saw a man in a UCP. Had to look it up again. This one is universal camouflage pattern, which was used from 2005 to 2019. And they were crying on a bench somewhere in the B Company barracks at or near the airborne school. He says that this could not have been a real person because the lights in the room are motion activated, and the lights were not triggered by the man's presence. He says he was watching cameras and no one came in or out. I feel like it's relevant to disclose that he was recently sent for a psychological evaluation because he reacted violently to a minor inconvenience. And I was recently sent to a psychiatric hospital for PTSD and depression, as well as possible bipolar disorder. I say this not to discount his encounters, but rather to try to fully understand all of the contributing factors to our situation. sharing an old experience that still haunts me to this day. So, I grew up with toxic parents, and I developed depression through the years, and cried a lot in the corner of my room. I attempted suicide twice there, too. I shared my room with my younger sister, who was badly abused by my mother. A lot of beating and crying happened in that room from her side as well. This is to say that it's a very negative era in our life during that time, and I had multiple sleep paralyses, and also believed that I experienced astral projection, even though at the time I thought a spirit was trying to pull me out of my body. So the story started when my younger sister went to visit my cousin, and my cousin told her that she was possessed by a demon and showed her what the demon told her to do. A ritual to break up a couple in the neighborhood, among other things that included a mirror and smoke. My cousin was acting strange during that period, and her mother was moving from psychiatrist to another to try to explain her behavior and treat her. The conclusion was that my cousin was schizophrenic because she saw and talked to somebody that didn't exist. Just as a side note, our family is the type of family that even if they witness a demon face to face, they won't believe it and will try to get a medical or scientific explanation for it all. So my sister, 15 at the time, comes back from visiting my cousin, terrified. And she told me, she was 22 at the time, that all about what had happened. And I'm like, okay, this is bullshit. But I listen to her and comfort her as much as I can. She swears that she will sort of feel a spirit during the rituals, and brushed it off, saying that it was just a psychological sort of a thing, and that my cousin is probably crazy and seeing a doctor for that, actually. Moving forward, my sister becomes convinced she's possessed by a spirit. She tells me the spirit tells her things to help her, warn her about things, and guide her. She starts not eating as much as she usually would, and starts avoiding the bath. After a while, the whole room starts smelling like rotten flesh, like a cur gecko. I would push her into the bathroom and force her to take a bath every week or so, and deep clean the room every week, moving furniture and scrubbing the walls. And the smell was only getting worse, and it was mostly coming from her side of the room. I was convinced her hormones and the lack of showers were the reasons, so I was making sure to shove her into the bathroom at least twice a week, deep clean the room, and provide all kinds of deodorant and perfumes to her. The smell was getting worse, and her behaviors were getting worse. She would know when would my father come home, exactly by the minute. She would know if she had a pop quiz. She would know where someone's going and why, and she would be able to talk to anyone into doing anything that she wanted. And a lot of other weird things. She would wake up tired, have the deepest black eyes, and a lot of bruises. I run all kinds of blood work on her to fix it, but it all came back normal. She would find dead rats in her purse and other weird things. Now the experience. That night, my little sister, aged 5 at the time, came to sleep with us in our room, and I was in the living room studying until really late. By 2 a.m. or so, I decided to go to sleep. I had this feeling that I should avoid my room and that I should just stay away, but I brushed it off. I went into my room. And when I opened the door, it smelled horrible, like somebody died in there, and there was no air, like no more oxygen. I opened the window to let some air in, but I felt no change. I stuck my nose in the window to breathe some fresh air, but there was none. I decided to just try to sleep anyway. My body was screaming at me to leave the room. I grabbed my pillow, and I was going to go to the living room, And then I thought, no, spirits and ghosts are not real. This is all my sister being terrified. The smell must be from furniture being damp, and we need to replace it. And just figured out in the morning. So I stayed. I felt the air become very heavy when I lied down. I moved and felt like my hands aren't mine, so I touched my body and I felt as if somebody else was touching me. I was super scared. I opened my eyes and I saw this black giant figure standing at the edge of my bed. It was so big and so black, like no light could be shed on it. I blinked and it didn't go away. I was like, okay, I'm very tired from not sleeping enough. This is all in my head. So I turned my back to it and slept. I was sleeping when I transitioned into what I believe was a dream. I woke up and the demon was there, very black, and an evil feeling was coming out of it. I run to wake my sister, but the demon blocked me, so I run to the door to find my mother. I knocked on her door until she opened. I told her all about what was going on. She didn't care, and the demon was coming after me, so I run to the bathroom to hide. And there, I saw a flame in the mirror, so I run back to my room, but I couldn't open the door, so I kept banging on it until I forced it open, and then my night lamp exploded, and I woke up. When I woke up, I was terrified, but the room didn't smell as bad as before I went to sleep, and there was more light in the room instead of the pitch black before. I didn't go back to sleep. I stayed awake all night until morning. When everybody woke up, I noticed that my sister was barely walking. She said she was extremely tired and was bruised more than usual. I also noticed that the room door wouldn't close anymore. It was moved horizontally. And somehow, it doesn't fit the door frame anymore, and no one knows why. My lamp had exploded, and my curtains were on the floor, and I noticed that they were pulled from the walls as if someone used a hammer to knock the hanging rod off. It was very weird. But I kept saying to myself that everything must have an explanation. Until I went to have my breakfast. My 5-year-old sister saw me and said, "Hey sis, there was a fairy just messing with your tummy and playing with it like it was Play-Doh." I asked, "What fairy?" She said, "The flying black fairy. He's a fairy because he can fly." I asked her to describe the fairy, and she said that it was scary. So when she saw it, she just closed her eyes and started praying to God. More things happened afterwards, like knocking on the walls, someone choking my mother for a few seconds. She was speaking about it randomly in dinner. My sister got even weirder until I moved out. I heard that my cousin, who was diagnosed schizophrenic at the age of 19, had a religious exorcism performed on her, and that afterward she wasn't seeing anything weird or talking to any invisible beings anymore. Her psychiatrist couldn't keep her on medication, and she said she was spontaneously cured from schizophrenia after having more than 2 years of being diagnosed. My cousin reached out to my sister and took her to the same exorcist, and now she's fine. The smell left the house. We never talked about what happened. The house was blessed. We're not a religious family, but it was like trying everything just for the sake of it. And I'm an agnostic. My mother talked about things she experienced in the house, but we never shared our experiences with her. What do you think that was? The bin that moved by itself. A few months ago, I had an unusual experience that was completely new to me. Although I had always believed in the existence of ghosts and the paranormal, I'd never encountered anything of the sort before. My room is fairly small, and one morning as I hurriedly got out of bed, my foot accidentally knocked over the bin, causing it to fall on its side. Pressed for time, I didn't bother picking it up and I left the room. Later that evening, feeling a bit tired, I entered my room and lay face down on my bed with my head buried in the pillow. At the opposite end of my room, there was a radiator next to a large plastic tub. Earlier, I had stepped on the tub to reach something in the wardrobe, causing it to collapse and shatter. However, I had left the broken pieces there without bothering to clean them up. While laying on my stomach with my head buried, I suddenly heard what seemed like a cracking sound, as if something was walking over to the shards of plastic. I clearly heard it, but dismissed it, assuming it was the sound of the radiators heating up and the plastic cracking. I didn't move and continued to rest, and as I was, the sound ceased. I reconsidered and told myself that if I heard it again, I would quickly get up to investigate. I remained awake and in the same position, and it wasn't long before I heard the cracking sound again. I swiftly turned around and moved toward the foot of my bed, and where I witnessed the bin, which I had knocked over in the morning, righting itself. It was completely unknocked over. I was shocked, but not frightened, so I grabbed the bin and shook it. At the time, I didn't think much of it. There was another freestanding radiator near the spot where the bin had fallen. I rationalized the incident by assuming that the bin had been squeezed by the other radiator and somehow propped itself back upright. However, the more I think about it, the less plausible that explanation seems. I'm not well versed in physics or anything like that, but it doesn't appear possible for there to be enough tension between the bin and the radiator to cause it to spontaneously return to an upright position. The day the cat lady vanished. Around 10, maybe 15 years ago, I was working around an industrial estate as a machine operator. I'd pulled a Sunday shift, a 7 to 3, standard one really. I'd worked the full week, and at the end of that shift, I'd just about gotten my limit, so I was feeling tired. I locked up after a couple of the other guys had left and started walking up to the bus station. The layout of the estate was fairly open. You could see pretty much everything, and everybody, as you were walking. To this day, and believe me, it's really still as clear of a day as it was in my mind then. I have no idea where she came from. A woman literally 10 feet away from me, as I'm walking with a large ginger tom in her arms. And she looked like she was in her nightwear, barefoot. So I stopped, because it fell off. Hairs on the back of my neck off. I asked her if she was all right, to which she replied, "Kitty is sad. Kitty's not got a home. Can you take Kitty?" I think it took me a second, but I said I already had a cat. She repeated it all again and looked up at me. Now, I said it was off, the entire look of the situation. But soon as I got a look into her eye, my entire body felt like it had ice water all over it. I can't really put it into words, but the word crazy and loony were pretty predominant in my mind. So I'm apologizing, and she's repeating, getting louder. She was a skinny thing, and I'm a big guy. But I was getting afraid. Again, no idea how or why I'm reacting like this. So the fight or flight reflex is in full swing. I was backing up and sort of sidestepping the entire way. And I was also apologizing all the way. And I was basically walking backwards, toward where the bus station was. But here's the thing. She was out of my eyesight for maybe 30 seconds when I crossed onto the side street. I still had a full view of her, and she was gone. in the middle of a wide open space, no place to go. Still gives me the willies thinking about it. Chasers by the Wind. Escape from Mugger's Tunnel. So we're going to go back around 25 years ago. And again, this is a moment in my life that's burned into my head with cold, hard clarity. Just because it scared me so badly. That night I'd been spending time with my girlfriend, and we'd been out for some sort of function, and it resulted in me having to walk her back to her house, which was a ways away. And certainly pretty far from where I lived with my parents at the time. It was well past midnight, but the roads were well lit, and it was straightforward getting her back to her house. I left her there and said my good nights like a gentleman, and I'm starting to walk home. Now this is where it kind of gets sticky. To get to where I lived, it's necessary to go through a tunnel under a bridge that is literally 2 people wide. It's poorly lit, and if I'm honest, it's absolutely terrifying. That tunnel is cold, like bone cold all year round, and people have been murdered there, plural. Robbed and murdered over the years. So just going through there in daylight is awful. You can actually feel how horrid that place is. So I decided that the detour in this particular evening wasn't worth the hassle, and I had a little bit of an old Dutch courage in me. 3 steps into that tunnel, and the cold hit me through my jacket, like enough for me to catch my breath. Halfway in, and I was sure that there was someone in there, behind me, to the stage that I thought I heard footsteps. Everything in me said, turn around, but for some reason I wouldn't. It made no sense at the time, but it felt like the right thing to do. In the end, just before reaching the staircase, I bolted. Don't ask me why. I felt like if I didn't, something was going to happen. Like I'd spent too long in there. That damn tunnel. I got to the top of the steps and the street lamps, and literally as soon as I did, the wind picked up. Like ridiculously high wind. My jacket whipped up, and I had to sort of shield my eyes. So again, I don't know if it was panic or instinct, but I took off running, and it felt like the wind followed me. And all the way, I just felt like something was paying attention to me, like it was following me. I ran as fast as I could for what seemed like an eternity. All the while, I kept thinking if I stopped, that it'll have me. Please bear in mind, I know that sounds totally irrational, and I was 19 years old. But I got to my parents' house, and I locked that door, and I didn't sleep that night. Because I sat there and I just listened to the wind at night till morning came. It really did feel at the time like it was trying to get to me. That one shift too many. Through the early 2000s, I guess I worked a lot. Usually 7 days a week. Sometimes 12 hours and above. I think my longest run was 17 weeks working 7 days without a real rest. It's that particular run that I'm writing about. So for anyone that's read my previous posts about the cat lady, I mentioned some sightings that happened to me in the place I worked. Here's my own. I was coming to the end of a particularly long stint of working overtime. I'd been going on for about 7 weeks. It was Sunday. It was getting late. I was doing shut down and lock up, making sure everything was safe before leaving. This usually meant that I was the last man standing and the last man out. I went through my usual routine, which was kind of like a circuit. First sign of things being off was a movement that I caught on the edge of my peripheral vision. I turned to see what had caught my attention. Nothing there. My first reaction was something was just amiss. So I did what any other 23-year-old guy does and picked up something large and heavy. I shouted a couple of times that I would phone the cops, try to scare the guy if there was a guy. Adrenaline was high, no reply. So I carried on shutting down. Going about getting home, and then I saw him, just stood there. 30, maybe 40 yards away, tall, black jacket, bald head, just stood there. Only problem is that he had no face, no nose, no eyes, no mouth. Now I'm super tired at this rate, so even though I'm just kind of blind panicking, I screwed my eyes shut, rubbed them hard, shook my head, because that isn't possible, right? But he's still there. So I turned and walked pretty much as fast as I could the other way, but not run. But I was walking quick enough to maybe break into a run if I needed to. I got downstairs pretty quickly, grabbed my coat and bag, set the alarm, and out I went. Locked the doors and went home. Now I know what you may think. He was tired, worked too many hours, and seeing stuff. I didn't feel threatened by it, just to be clear, but it wasn't friendly, and it definitely didn't want me around. Now fast forward 3 months, old colleague of mine walking down the stairs from the canteen one early morning. Just me and him there as usual. He's white as a sheet, stuttering. I looked at him and said, "Black coat, bald head, quite tall." He nods, and we go outside for our coffees. And I calm him down a bit. There was a few sightings of whatever it was after that, mainly when people were on their own, mainly getting a feeling of unease. I'm glad I'm not there anymore, as it wasn't the last time I saw him either. The White House That Stands Alone. I would have been 13 or 14 when this happened, and to this day, even remembering this gives me goosebumps. 30 years is a long time to still be afraid. Where I lived when I was a kid, it was a pretty poor place. You sort of, quote-unquote, made your own entertainment, as people used to say. There was always little myths and legends about this house. People never seemed to stay there long. People were supposedly murdered there, and all the other whispers that wrapped a huge malevolent ribbon around the place. And you knew if you walked past this house that it was there, looming over you, on its own, in the middle of the road, full of terraced houses. It just seemed to stare down. Me and my pals would walk past quite a lot over the summer holidays. One of the lads lived a bit further down from it, so we passed it every time that we called for him. So this is kind of how this all began. You see, there weren't many of us who'd walk past this place at night, like ever. Even the kid who lived near it would walk the other way home. So that's where we decided enough was enough. We were going to go to this house, and go in it, to see what the big deal was all about. It was empty, and had been for some time. We looked through the windows round back. No furniture, no nothing. And some druggies or whatever had already broken in the door round the back, which meant that we would be explorers, and we'd be able to see for ourselves that there was nothing to fear. There we were, 4 of us, walking through the door like that we were afraid of nothing. Trouble was, I was already uneasy. The house itself was massive on the inside, and it seemed gray. The light, what was left of it, had a weird hue to it, probably the dust on the windows, but still made it feel like it was another place entirely. So, we went about the wandering, each in a different direction, so I climbed the stairs. All the while I'm listening to the sounds of my friends. The rooms were large, no furniture, and that weird colored light filled the room when I walked in. My sense of unease had progressed to real nervous tension. I was looking in the corners for signs of movement. looking for something here that would give me an excuse to leave. The light was waning, and the rooms got darker, and that's finally when I caught something in one of the doorways. Faint, dull red lights, like little dots, moved across the door, behind the wall on the landing. And that's when a random thought popped into my head. The house knows we're here. I called down to my friends and told them it was time to get out of here. There wasn't an answer to that. I would later find out that as I went upstairs, they'd be left thinking that it would be a laugh to leave me up there. I looked around as it was getting dark, and the stairs were steep. The red, dull lights were there again, which again jacked up my anxiety to fear. The lights were in front of me, where the top of the staircase was. This to me, there, and then a problem. I don't understand that. This to me, there, and then was a problem, as at the time the words "fey lights" were not familiar to me, and of course I was now bordering on terrified. There was a bang. I'm not sure what it was, but it snapped me out of my reverie, and nearly made me soil myself. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I stumbled down the stairs to the bottom. And when I saw an outline in the doorway to the living room, and I screamed, only nothing came out. Just some sort of hoarse whistle. I ran from it and strategically retreated or withdrew to the kitchen where the back door was, jumped straight through, and it fell as I hit the ground. As I got up, I saw, and I swear I did, something at the window, and it was looking down straight at me. And I ran straight out of that garden, straight down that road, through the park, past my friends who were all laughing, tears running down my face until I got to my grandmother's house. I told her what happened, and she just sat there and she simply said, "There are some places that are just bad, and they always will be, and you'll always know them, because that's what they are. And places like that will always bring bad things to them. Best to keep away." In the years that followed, even if it took me out of my way, I never passed that house. Not alone, at any rate. And even with a gun to my head, I doubt anybody would get me to go through that door again. I still watch it come up for sale every couple of years. Maybe one day somebody will pull it down. But even if they did, I'll still have it in the back of my head of what happened that night, whether I imagined it all or not. A story for dog lovers. 8 years ago, I lost my dog, and if I'm honest, a piece of myself. Fundamentally, anybody who's ever had a dog in their life knows how special they are, how individual they are, what they do for you, and in the end, what you lose when they're gone to go to the beyond. Everyone thinks that their dog is special, and they're not wrong. And with that in mind, I'll tell you a bit about my dog, how we found each other, and what led to the events in the first place. I first met Baxter at a rescue center. I'd walk around the place twice, as it was the time that I was just looking real hard for the dog that we would agree upon with my wife, until we found some enclosures that we'd not yet seen. As you can imagine, all the dogs in there were going crazy and barking, yelping, bouncing up and down, all save one. Right at the end of the enclosures was a large, skinny black dog, silent, and sat still just staring. Of course, I walked over and stared right back at him. Just as I turned to call my wife, he barked at me. Don't ask me why, but he has me right there, and I have to say it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. He was the epitome of a man's best friend. Even though he was a Heinz 57, a Labrador Doberman cross, he was sweet-tempered yet fiercely protective. He was smart but goofy. And he so loved my little boy. When the time came, as it does, to take the last walk with him, it broke me. Down to the pit of my soul and hurt me in a way I'd really never thought I could be hurt. The bond I had with him was so strong. He knew my moods, he knew everything. Hell, he even cried with me when my grandmother died. Which leads me to the last bit of this cathartic tale I'm telling. I brooded a lot after he passed, and it was a long time before I felt like myself. So eventually I started to feel more like myself when every now and again it felt like he was around. Sometimes it felt like something was sitting on my feet, or I'd feel something brush up against me. Things I wrote off in my head. However, what I couldn't write off was the day that I was walking to the shops and a little girl said to her mom as I walked past her, "Mommy, look at that dog walk behind that mister." I nearly choked and burst into tears as obviously no dog that could be seen was following me. So the entire reason for this, to all the dog lovers who may read or hear this, they go on. And they do hang around. For a while at least, anyway. My boy did. And maybe I'll see him again one day. Unexplained occurrences recently. For context, on my new apartment, it's a part of a duplex apartment thing that sits atop a 3-car garage in the backyard of my landlord's house. The property is very old. I want to say the house was built anywhere in the 40s or 50s. Same goes for the apartment. The apartment attached to mine is to the left of mine, whereas my front door is to the right of the apartment, and their front doors is to the left of theirs. So ever since I moved in, there's been these very unexplainable noises. Like I hear someone knock on my front door quite frequently. And I know it isn't coming from my neighbors because it's too loud and clear, and it comes from the right side of my apartment. I also hear footsteps walk through my apartment to the bathroom, which once again is too loud and clear to be my neighbors. Another time, the cage door to my cat slammed shut and rattled super loud. The cage is elevated on a shelf, and the cats can't get to it. They were also next to me when this happened. The most recent occurrence, and quite honestly the weirdest, is when in the middle of the night I heard my front door slam shut and footsteps walk across my floor. I know for a fact that it was my door and not my neighbor's because my door gets caught, so you have to slam it to get it open or closed. Plus, it sounded like it was in the same room as I was. My cats also look up to the ceiling a lot these days and randomly get distracted by nothing. And this is out in the living room as well. Felt like I got pushed down the stairs. Some cash that I had set aside was taken out of a closed drawer and strewn across my floor. Nothing was taken, though. I count it, write it down every time I add or take from it. Then I come home and my fridge magnets are all out of place. I organize them into a heart because I think it's cute. But they were just a jumbled mess. The noises are less common, but louder now. Now it sounds like someone is running toward me every few days. And I constantly have this strange feeling that makes me keep my bathroom door shut, because it just has this awful, creepy vibe coming from it. My older and more intuitive cat is terrified to go in there. He loves sitting with me while I shower or bathe. But since moving in, he struggles getting through the doorway and his tail fuzzes up. Also, some small noises come from my bathroom a lot. It ranges from sounding like breathing to sounding like a faucet is running when it's not. There are also no leaks underneath the sink or kitchen sink, nor are there any cracks in the windows that something could get into. And then, day 2, as I'm making my weekly trash run, it felt like I got kicked down the stairs. I have pretty good reflexes, so thankfully I didn't fall many steps, but I did land pretty harshly on my butt and have a huge bruise there. Like I can barely sit down huge. There's another less big but still pretty darn big bruise on my leg that only hurts when touched. But still, it felt like someone kicked me in the back of my thigh while I was walking down. There's still a few marks there, but I have quite a few unexplainable bruises across both legs and arms, so I just don't know. I'm not even scared by this, since I do have an amazing price on my rent compared to literally every other person on my street. But it's still a little unnerving. And I'm starting to experience a similar paranoia that I had as a child, like I'm being watched. That's the end of today's stories. I'm trying a different microphone today that might discourage my gecko from screaming into it. I hope to see you next time, and as usual, always a pleasure. See ya.